Hello, I'm Michelle Wilcher and I'm a homeschool transition coach. Today I'd like to talk to you a little bit about grading coursework for high school. When your student is in high school, oftentimes you can purchase a curriculum that will cover a particular course, 11th grade English or history, whatever the coursework may be. When you purchase that curriculum, often there are guidelines for grading the coursework, the assignments as part of that curriculum, the tests, the papers, the projects that they may have to do. In addition to that, the course curriculum may also specify a specific type of grading scale for that course. This makes it fairly easy to go through the grading process. However, when you're creating your own courses, it's not quite so clear-cut as to how to create a grading scale for that particular course. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. But before I go into that a little bit more, I'd like to clarify some of the terms that we're using. When I use the word grading scale, I'm talking about the way that a teacher actually grades the coursework during a particular course. So the tests, the papers, the assignments, the projects, whatever it is that you're assigning the student to do. Most often, teachers will use a 100-point grading scale for assignments. This allows them to have a lot of flexibility in how to actually grade or evaluate that student on that particular project. They don't have to choose either a 9 or a 10 or a 1 through 5. They can choose any number between 1 and 100. So it gives them a lot of leeway in grading assignments. It also helps as they're averaging these grades together to get a final grade. The grading scale itself can flex. So some school systems will use a 10-point grading scale. A 90 to 100 equals an A, an 80 to an 89 equals a B, and so forth. Sometimes they're more complex than that. They have pluses and minuses included in those. Other schools may use a 7-point scale. 93 to 100 is an A, and so forth and so on. Other schools, I've seen 12-point scales, I've seen 7.5-point scales, I've seen scales that are just all over the map. So the grading scale that you use there's not one right grading scale to choose. And in addition to that, you may decide to choose a different grading scale for different courses. Some courses, the curriculum textbook may suggest one grading scale and another curriculum may suggest another grading scale. So when you're putting a grading scale on your transcript, if you've used different grading scales over different courses, you may just decide, well, I'm just going to leave the grading scale off and just use the letter grades on my transcript. This is perfectly fine to do. So the difference between a grading scale and a grade point average. The grading scale allows the teacher to grade the coursework and come up with a final grade for the course. So for instance, a teacher may average all the grades together and come up with the student's final grade, which is an 89. So the student receives a B or B plus, depending on what scale you're using. And that B or B plus goes on the high school transcript as the final grade for that course. The grade point average is an average of all course grades together. So you take all of the course grades and you're going to translate those into a 4-point scale and come up with a cumulative GPA or grade point average for the entire series of coursework for the entire high school year. This is a different process and will be discussed in a different video and will also be discussed in detail in my downloadable resource about how to create your own high school transcript. I will also say that the process of creating a grading scale and grading coursework will be talked about in detail in my downloadable resource on how to create a course and grade it as well. And you can purchase both of those from my website. So as we've talked about this grading scale and the fact that it's not necessarily all the same for all courses and all schools, one of the things that you need to understand is that as you're going forward with trying to create grading scales and you're creating your own courses, you have to figure out a way to translate the work that the student is doing in that particular course into some kind of grading scale. So let's go back to the courses that we created in my other video. When we talked about creating courses, we created a piano course and we created an American history course. So let's talk about those as samples for just a moment. The piano course, one of the things that you need to do is figure out what it is you want as for learning outcomes for your student. Maybe you want them to understand the value of practice. Maybe you want them to increase their piano skill level. Maybe you want them to learn respect for a professional, for the teacher. There could be a variety of other things that you desire for them. But let's just go with those 3 outcomes for now. one of the things you can do is create a grading grid for the student based on those outcomes, those learning outcomes. So let's just say I'm going to grade my student on those 3 things, and I'm going to choose whether they did excellently at those things, good, average, or poor. Or maybe I'm going to choose a number from 1 to 10, which will also translate to a 100-point scale as you do that. With a course like piano, you can't get into quite as much of the detail. So you can also give a copy of this grading scale to the teacher for them to grade the student as well. So you're grading them on some very intangible ideas and thoughts and learning outcomes, but you're putting it down into a tangible way. Again, I go into this in great depth in my downloadable resource on creating and grading courses. Let's talk about the American History course for a moment. Remember, we created a bunch of assignments for the student to do and choose from. Reading some novels, writing some book reports, going to some museums, talking about this with their parents after they've come back from the museum, going to some reenactments. There were a variety of activities and options that the student could do to get credit in that course. How do you grade that? Well, again, you need to decide what is the outcome you're actually looking for and what kind of scale do you want to use to grade that. You know, on a book report, it's easy to do a scale of 1 to 100. But on going to a museum and participating in a museum, you may want a different scale, like did excellently, good, average, or poor, or 1 to 10, or whatever it is. You can combine and mix and match these as long as you have a way to get them all to the same 100-point scale or whatever it is you're going to be averaging for the final course grade. In addition to using a grading scale of this nature and grading assignments on a particular grading scale, teachers will also apply more weight, if you will, or influence on some assignments more than others. So for instance, a teacher may say, well, the homework in the class in this course is going to be weighted at 40% of the grade. The papers will be 20% of the grade. The written assignments from the textbook will be 10% of the grade. The final exam will be 10%. Whatever it is, it all has to equal 100, but in the end, they all do. But they give more influence to that final grade on some assignments rather than others. The way to do this, again, I will describe in detail in my downloadable resource called Creating Your Course and Grading It Too. It's not hard, it's very simple to do. So you can look at that and learn. When you are creating these courses and you're coming up with these guidelines, remember that it's not always about the standard traditional learning outcomes that we see in public high schools. You may have other outcomes that you want for your student. You may have character outcomes that you want to see for your student. You may have attitude outcomes that you want to see from your student. You may have a variety of different things that don't quite fit into the 1 to 100 scale. It is okay, and it is okay to include those things in assigning a course grade to your student. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you did, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. You may also go to my website and purchase the downloadable resources I mentioned or sign up for some coaching. The link to my website is in the description of this video. Thanks for watching.